Why do people take risks? Usually they know better, but bad decisions, often in the moment and almost always against policies, still get made. So how do we move past compliance and zero incident goals to a better understanding of why people take risks in the first place? And more importantly, how to help them make different choices. Today I'm talking to David Galloway, an author and safety culture consultant who's spent more than 35 years working in manufacturing operations. As a certified Master Black Belt, a certified Master Facilitator, and a Lean Six Sigma deployment leader, Dave knows how to get to the root of a problem using a disciplined, data-driven approach and a continuous improvement mindset. In the conversation that follows, Dave shares some of his insights on why people take risks and what we can and should be doing about it.
My background is not one of a typical safety professional. I have over 35 years of manufacturing and business process leadership experience, but in my entire career, I never held an official safety leadership role. But I've always had a passion for this topic, and that passion is driven by a couple of very painful and personal stories in my life that I experienced while I was working. And I always felt like that there was a huge component of leadership that determined whether or not people could work safely or not. So I took that passion with me, and I had an opportunity to work with safety professionals and developing a safety strategy centered on leadership. And so now what I do, I've been 5 years on my own. I provide strategic and leadership advice to organizations who want to improve their safety performance through leadership principles.
I understand you also have a background in Lean Six Sigma. What is that?
Yes, well, Lean Six Sigma is a structured method for process improvement. It's been around for decades. One could say that its genesis was way back in the days of W. Edwards Deming. For those of you who may not know that, he was instrumental in helping the Japanese to recover their industrial economy after World War II. And many of the principles were founded there and then built on by others. And it is really a structured, statistically based, scientific method for using these tools to implement process improvement. So the same principles that you would use in using data to drive process improvements, there's also a critical element of leadership, obviously, that falls in there as well.
And you've been applying these principles to helping companies build safety cultures?
What I find interesting is that there are many folks who will use Lean Six Sigma to improve processes, but the most successful ones recognize that's only half of the equation. The people who are most successful are those who recognize that you don't need the data to understand the process, but you need to understand how people think, how they behave, and what drives their actions. And many of those things are largely determined by your leadership style.
Last year, you published a book, Safety Walk, Safety Talk. How did you come up with the title?
Yeah, Safety Walk, Safety Talk. So at a high level, those are the two things that leaders need to do. And I would argue many of us do not do quite well. And that is that safety walk means you need to purposefully organize and go to the gemba, as they would say in Japanese, meaning the place where work is done, take a walk and specifically go to where people are doing the work. And then when you are there, you need to have a safety talk. So the safety talk is how to have the right conversation, how to have an effective safety conversation that promotes trust, collaboration, and learning. So at its highest level, people who are in a leadership position need to embrace the idea of conducting a safety walk followed by an effective safety talk.
I've had a chance to read the book, and it's a great read, by the way. I can see how the Six Sigma toolkit is being applied. It's throughout all of the chapters. In the book, you point out that most companies spend a considerable amount of time developing and executing their business strategy, but they don't invest the same level of effort into a safety strategy. Doesn't safety impact a company's ability to execute that business strategy?
Well, that's often a missing piece for a company who may or may not be successful in their business, however they measure those, whatever those key measures are. But ironically, they don't recognize the need to have a strategy for improving their safety performance. So many senior executives and senior leaders will take the time to think about strategically in the next 5, 6, 8 years, where is the company going and how are we going to get there? What are we going to focus on? What are we going to divest? What are we going to invest in? Yet we don't take that same mindset as executives or senior leaders when it comes to safety. And I would argue that's equally important because your people are what will enable you to be successful or not. And if they do not know that they are cared for and that they don't recognize that we have a common set of values that we embrace, and they don't know what actions are expected, then how can we expect them to just simply, quote, work safely every day? We can't just demand it. We can't just implore it. We can't just hope for it. We actually have to come up with a strategy that says, these are the things that are most important. These are the actions that we need to take as leaders, importantly, so that we become role models for and set the expectations for our employees for them to work safe. We can't just go through a checklist of things to say, if we do these things and if we fill up the checklist or the task list of things to keep our employees safe and presume that if all those things are executed, people, in fact, will not become hurt. That simply is not true.
So you're kind of saying that, safety needs to be about more than just compliance. So couldn't a leader just focus, though, on they can have the most comprehensive policies, they can have training, even have tools in place. If they focus on compliance then against those policies, won't that achieve a safe environment?
Well, you've really hit on a nerve when it comes to me personally, because unfortunately, if we just think about compliance as leaders and solely say the best we can do is to be fully compliant with all rules, regulations, and procedures, and if we are the best in that arena, then people will not get hurt. And that simply is not true. Compliance is fundamental, important, but not sufficient. Being compliant just because we are very good at enforcing compliance and being compliant does not mean that people will not be influenced to take a risk or inadvertently make a mistake or be distracted or be rushed or become complacent. And it matters not how compliant we are with the rules or procedures. Human behavior will drive us to make a mistake or to take a risk. And compliance is not going to get us where everyone wants to be, and that's a zero incident workplace.
You bring up a good point. Why do people take risks in the first place? Don't we know better?
Why do people take risks? Well, the simple answer is because we're human. The more detailed answer is, in fact, people have studied this for quite some time, and quite a number of chapters in my book are delving into some of the reason why people take risks. Beyond the fact that we're human, behavioral psychologists have identified that it is a limitation of the way that we think, the thoughts that we have, the role models that we have, the circumstances that we're in. So we take risks not because we're cavalier about our safety, but as someone once said, people take risks because it made sense to them at the time that they did it. We weigh out the possibility, even if it's just subconsciously, on what's the probability of me becoming hurt if I take this chance or I take a small risk. If my perception is that I don't believe it's a very high likelihood of me being hurt, and I balance that against the gain that I will have in time or efficiency or ease of use, and I take that risk fully expecting it is not likely for me to get hurt. And so I do it. So there's many examples of how we as humans are easily and dramatically influenced to take risk, not because we're bad people, but because we're human.
I think that explains why, despite there being a law in every state, people still are distracted by their phones when they're driving.
They absolutely are. One of the reasons that people take risks is because they are trapped into making a mistake. We are highly fallible. I say we as a human species. Humans are very fallible. We are prone to making mistakes. One of the reasons that we could make a mistake is we become distracted. There are numerous other reasons why we can make mistakes, but distracted, interestingly, based on the data I have of over 10,000 conversations that were documented, distraction is the third highest documented reason why someone took a risk. The most prevalent reason is we become complacent. Another reason is we feel rushed. There is a sense of some time pressure in getting a task completed. So the most prevalent reason for making a mistake, I become complacent. The second highest reason people might commit human error is they feel some sort of time pressure. And the third most frequent reason someone could make a mistake is they become distracted from the task at hand.
You mentioned earlier that it's important to let employees know that they're cared for. Why is caring the most important attribute of leadership? And why do you think it's necessary in developing a safer company?
Caring is at the heart of my personal philosophy. In my opinion, if you are serious about making sure that you have done everything as a leader so that your employees go home safe at the end of the day, you will never be able to look yourself in the mirror and say that I have done everything that I can unless you recognize that the reason that people do what they do and will follow you is because you sincerely care about them and they know that you care about them. Caring, it's all about the why. So Simon Sinek, who perhaps some of your listeners may know about, several years ago published a seminal book that talks about start with why. And what he really means by that, and what I am saying here, based on Sinek's own assessment of that, is it is not just about how you do something or what you do. You have to always start with why am I doing it? And in my view, it's critically important that leaders recognize the reason that we are doing anything when it comes to safety is because we care about one another. It doesn't matter how proficient I am at creating a safety rule. It doesn't matter how much technology I deploy. It does not matter how much structure I follow. If it doesn't start with a purpose of the reason that I'm doing any of this is because I care about others and I do not want to see them get hurt, then we will often fall short of the mark on how well we will ultimately execute that. People need to know that you care about them and they are cared for.
Does that start at the very top CEO level, or is that something that it can be just as effective if it's the safety leadership that's driving that message? Or do you need to have it at the very top?
It needs to start at the top. It needs to absolutely start with the executive leadership. Caring needs to start with the executive leadership. And importantly, it cannot be delegated. I cannot stress that enough. At any point in the chain of management, if someone is doing this because they're told they have to, they're expected to, that will ring hollow. People will see right through it. So the point is this: for the person doing the work who is potentially at risk, their supervisor, the one to whom they report, they need to know that their supervisor, their team leader, their manager cares about them, and that needs to be sincere and candid. If there's any other approach that's taken, you are going to never connect with that individual, and frankly, they will rightfully become cynical about the real purpose behind anything that you're asking them to do.
There's a concept in your book about confirmation bias. First, can you explain what that is?
Certainly. So confirmation bias in simple terms is I see what I expect to see, or said a little bit more in detail, confirmation bias says I have a theory. I believe that I will see something. I believe there's a relationship between something that I see and an action or an outcome. And so what I will do then is I will seek out data or observations or anecdotal evidence that supports this bias that I have. And in fact, when I see these things, it confirms the bias that I have. So the key takeaway for this, the key thing that we need to be aware as leaders is, if I expect that I know why things happen, I will tend to see those things that support my theory or my belief, as opposed to being objective and looking for things that may disprove the belief that I carry. And of course, you can imagine that that creates a huge blind spot for us as leaders because we really don't understand the full picture. We're just looking to confirm a bias, whether we recognize it or not.
Do you think confirmation bias can influence an overall business leader's decision or perception of the role of safety in meeting business objectives?
Yes, confirmation bias becomes that blind spot because we can draw false conclusions about why things are happening, the relationships that occur, the causes for incidents, for example. And so if I have this bias ahead of time, I will seek to gather data to support that bias, and I will not see the things or ask the questions in an objective way so that I can really figure out why people are doing what they're doing. For example, in a safety investigation, if I believe, in extreme example, if I believe in investigation that the reason that someone is taking a risk is because they are simply reckless and they have a disregard for their own life or the livelihood of others, and they simply do that because they are either ignorant or reckless. I will seek only information, again, in an extreme example, that supports that conclusion, rather than, for example, the real 95% of the time, the reason that people take risk, as we talked about earlier, is because of one of two reasons. One, either I was influenced to take a risk for some perception or habit or some kind of an environmental circumstance where I'm influenced to take a shortcut, or two, I am error prone, and one of these error traps like complacency or distraction or time pressure or doing multiple tasks or peer pressure has set me up to make a mistake. But if I don't ask those questions in a way that seeks those potential contributing factors out, I will more easily and quickly draw a conclusion that it was not what the person was doing, but who they are. And that could lead to extremely poor decision-making at best.
There's a chapter in your book that I really liked. It's called My Stuff is Worth More. Loved that title. And what I found the most interesting about this was that people will make really dumb, irrational decisions when faced with personal change. Why is that the case?
Well, another one of the wonderful attributes we all have as human, whether we care to admit it or not, is that when it comes to how we assess the value in things, it is really a personal perception. And many studies have talked about the so-called endowment effect. Whereas if we are given an opportunity to assess the value of things that I own or things that I contribute to or work that I have made a contribution to, I will tend to overvalue anything that belongs to me or where I have contributed significantly relative to objective outsiders who are assessing the value of that item or that contribution. And of course, the significant impact of this is that if we don't recognize the endowment effect, we can try to force change and wonder why people are so resistant. Outside looking in, we look at it and see it just simply as something that objectively has only marginal value. But if I have been associated with that, whatever that piece of work is, with that workspace, it becomes personal to me, and it's harder for me to give that up. So in a safety context, you can imagine we're trying to help people through change, and we see as outsiders asking someone to do something that through our eyes should not be a major change. But sitting in their chair or standing in their shoes, you are threatening to take away something of value to me that has much greater value to me than it would appear to have for you. And that's why I am resisting the change.
You use a lot of real life stories throughout the book. And I'm wondering, because this is an area that businesses need to recognize when they want to implement a new policy or implement new tools to make their employees safer, and then they meet with objections to it. Do you have a real life example of this endowment effect?
Yes. Let me tell you a very story that is very much safety related. So a young man came up to me after a workshop and shared this story with me, and I'll relate it to your listeners. This young man told me that his grandfather worked in the same factory that he now currently worked in. And his grandfather, when he was a middle-aged man, was in an industrial accident. Unfortunately, he didn't say how, but it cost him his eye. He lost an eye in this accident. It was replaced with a glass eye. So his grandfather had a long career in the factory, and when he eventually retired, and his son, this young man's father, also worked at the factory doing similar work, and he worked there for at least 20 years or so. And one day he was talking to someone else where they had a safety meeting. And in the safety meeting, the topic was personal protective equipment and the importance of wearing safety glasses or face shields when doing certain tasks. This particular organization did not have a very good record of people willing to wear eye protection. The young man told me that his father carried with him at all times in his pocket in a small box his grandfather's glass eye. And he decided to go on a mission. He was not in a position of authority. He was not a supervisor. He was not a union leader. He was simply someone who worked there and cared about and saw the potential tragic loss of sight in an industrial environment. So every time that he would see someone who was not wearing safety glasses, he said nothing. He simply walked up to that person, reached in his pocket, pulled out the small wooden box, and handed it to that person who was not wearing safety glasses. When that person opened it up, there was his grandfather's glass eye. He asked for the box back, put it in his pocket again, and said nothing but left. Now imagine how personal that loss of eye in his family had, and how memorable that was, yet how distant it was for the person who did not see it important to put on his or her safety glasses. That story reverberated throughout the organization, and within a year, where they had struggled to have more than half of the employees wear eye protection, now almost everyone, without being prompted, were wearing the right eye protective gear.
I guess the flip side of the endowment effect is the what's in it for me. But what's in it for me and what I value might be different than what's in it for you and what you value. So how does a company solve for that if they want to enact something across their work group?
Well, you're right. It really does come down to saying you need to take what may appear to be an abstract or an irrelevant policy and make it so that it is relevant to the person that you are speaking with. One of the things that I think that we can use as leaders to think about that is there are 3 reasons why I may listen to you, because there is something that you are saying that has relevance to me. Anytime that I'm wanting to have a conversation with you or employing you to think about what's in it for you, I should think about making that conversation or my pitch or the story or the reasoning behind why I'm asking you to do this is, first of all, my plea to you should be principled. It should be prevalent, meaning that it's something that I am likely to see, and it's personalized because I can associate what you're telling me with the workplace that I have. So principled, prevalent, and personalized, those 3 P's are often easy. It's an easy way to think about how to make it relevant or what's in it for an individual. Principled meaning if you're telling me because it's a company policy and you're obligated to talk to me about it, that's the wrong why. It's the wrong principle. The reason I'm telling you is because I care about you. That's the principled part. The second P would be prevalent. Make it something that I am likely to see sometime in the near future. If you're talking about something that I've never seen or can't imagine experiencing, it's hard for me to imagine being in a circumstance where it's relevant to me. And then make it personalized. What is the real benefit of what you're asking me to do? And why should I do it to me personally? Not because it's generic for everyone, but because it has these implications to me, to my livelihood, to my family. So if you follow those guidelines, you're much more likely to affect change because people can internalize it and say, indeed, I can see what's in it for me.
I have to tell you, and I know I've said this before, I really enjoyed reading your book, and it's got me thinking about all these different approaches to how we talk safety to our customers and prospects. But I'm wondering, is your book just for safety leaders, or is there a value in all business leaders reading it?
Well, it's interesting, Kathleen, you should say that, because inevitably at least 1 or 2 other people out of 15 or 20 who may be in a workshop either tell me personally or write on the feedback sheet, David, this isn't just about safety. And of course, I recognize that. And so to your point, leadership is leadership is leadership. What I have tried to do here is to take some very fundamental but important behavioral psychology and leadership principles and apply them in a safety context. But as many people recognize who either read the book or go through the workshop, these principles can apply to quality, they can apply to productivity, they can apply to environmental, they can apply to logistical problems, they can apply to a lot of things. And the bottom line, as I see it, is understanding how people think, how they behave, why they do what they do, and how to lead them in a way in which they will embrace these things for the good of others as well as themselves.
Let's talk about your business now, Continuous Mile. What does that stand for?
Continuous Mile is a reflection on two really pieces of Continuous Mile. The first word, continuous, speaks to my continuous improvement background. Safety, like anything else in business, is a process. It's a complicated, interwoven, interconnected process, but it is a process. And so we need to view safety as the way that we do business, and any business today will tell you that they need to constantly get a little bit better, or within a very short time frame, they will fall behind the competition. Safety is no different. It's not a trip that has a beginning and an end. It's a journey, and it's a continuous improvement journey. That's the continuous part. MILE is an acronym that stands for Minor Improvements, Large Effect, MILE. So the minor improvement, large effect is really another way to talk about the subtitle of my book, which is how small changes in what you think, say, and do shape your safety culture. Small changes, minor improvements. There is nothing in the book that I advocate here that is beyond the reach of anyone who seeks to put it in place. There's nothing extraordinary. There's no exceptional skill required. These are small, minor things that, if they are done strategically and collectively, you can be assured that you are leading your organization toward a safer future. That's what Continuous Mile stands for. Continuously making minor improvements that can have a large effect on your organization.
If somebody wanted to find out more about Continuous Mile or where to get your book, where should they go?
Well, my website, www.continuousmile.com, has information about my philosophy. I do a blog there where I talk about leadership principles. I talk about my book. I talk about an app that people can use to document safety conversations of the right kind. A very extremely important thing that I do is many people can talk about safety and they say, well, I talk to others about safety all the time, but in my view, we don't know how to talk to others about safety. I provide a structured, simple method to have a much better safety conversation and a pocket guide. So that's also on the website. So continuousmile.com is where you can find information on the book, the pocket guide, and the applications as well.
Dave Galloway has taken the best of Lean Six Sigma, thrown in a bunch of behavioral psychology and a healthy dose of leadership principles, and is changing the way we talk about safety to achieve the business results that matter. It starts with an understanding that if you believe you already know why your people take risks, you'll end up looking for proof to support that assumption and miss many of the underlying causes that deserve your attention. And with that gaping blind spot, your decision-making is sure to be impacted, whether you realize it or not. So let's focus on the why before we jump to the what. That's a discipline that can extend far beyond safety to quality, productivity, environmental, and logistical problems, anything affecting your bottom line. This is Kathleen Fanato from TRUCE Software. Join me again as I talk to safety leaders across a wide range of industries to understand how what drives them in their field is also driving the success of their companies. It's no accident.